Hey, Brent Pourciau, TopVelocity.net. Special guests here from armcare.com. We got Dr. Ryan Crotin and Jordan Oseguara.
Close enough. Yeah, like we always say. It's good enough.
Is it something in Japanese?
No. Yeah.
Needs a teleprompter.
All right, so today we're going to go over 6 common flaws that typically lead to injury. And we're talking about like serious injury, that a throwing related injury. We're going to go 2 piece. We'll go one at a time and come back around. We're going to start with Dr. Ryan Crotin. Why don't you tell them more about you so they know more about you?
I'm Ryan Crotin. I am the Executive Vice President at armcare.com. Nutshell, I went to school for a very long time, 16 years after high school. And I have a dual PhD. It's a multidisciplinary one in exercise physiology, biomechanics, and worked in Major League Baseball for 10 years, a lot of different roles.
Well, give us a common flaw before Jordan here.
So, one of the things, without looking at mechanics, I'm going to tell you what I think a common flaw is that leads to injuries. I think icing your arm is not a good thing. And the reason being is that you need 3 things for your muscle tissue to heal. You need blood in, you need blood out, okay, and you need movement. You need to actually pump fluid out of the arm, okay, if there's any kind of micro swelling. What I noticed in my experience, it's not as prevalent anymore in baseball, is that ice use was at one point really high, and it's not on the rise anymore. But when that happens, especially if you're wrapping it and you're constricted, I mean, we've seen, and probably you and myself, icing was kind of our maintenance thing. Like I remember I would just ice my arm because what everybody else did, right? And one of the issues that you have there is that you're trapping blood. You're creating secondary cellular death because you're starving it from oxygen. The ice itself, the cold temperature is constricting the blood vessels. And in our courses, we talk about circulation is king and why preventing blood flow to the arm is a bad thing after pitching. And then when you're not using muscle pumping, you're just allowing fluid to be in there. The fluid's what causes the pain. Now, when you get back to mechanics, I don't think there's good or bad mechanics, okay? If there's no pain, okay, and they're performing well, I believe that we need to support them with strength. However, if we're not recovering well, okay, circulation is bad to the arm, maybe there's residual soreness, sometimes there's nerve damage. When I'm talking about icing and deep cryotherapy, you got to be careful because that changes the mechanics. I know we went over a lot of positions that cause problems, but one that I'm talking about is, potentially where you're having changes in the elevation of the arm is a big problem. And also, kind of how it lays back, changes in flexion at the elbow, all of these things that happen from a typical delivery, it just changes the loading that the body's used to. Our bodies, we self-select a pattern, which is called motor preferences. When we're all coached, eventually our bodies kind of figure out how do I move well based on the restrictions or constraints I have. And when you start coming out of them, that's called a compensation. There are some that are positive, but there are many that are, negative that actually are called pathomechanics. Those are pathological mechanics that lead to injury. And we got to be careful on how we reset ourselves, and regenerating that can influence mechanics. So my world is not typically just looking at movement alone. I want to look at the determinants that alter us.
So tell them a little about yourself, Jordan, and then give us your common flaw to injury.
So Jordan Oseguara. My name is rooted in Latin America. So kind of Japanese, I guess. But I'm a pitching coach. Played at prestigious university, Ryan talks about all the time, Vanguard University in Orange County. Did my master's degree at Concordia in Irvine. There's Concordias everywhere, but mine was the one in Irvine. From there, I was able to play a little bit of indie ball. Got into coaching in college at Vanguard University, and then was with the Angels with Ryan for a good number of years. And now going into my 4th-ish year, something like that, with Armcare. We've been here for a little bit now. And I kind of manage anyone who calls in and has a question on how to run the system, how do I apply this to my program, whatever it may be. I'm kind of the guy who runs you through on what to do with a lot of that stuff. But for me, my big contributor to injury arm pain, arm soreness, different things like that is not overtraining, overthrowing, it's under recovering. So my whole thing on that is we need to understand how the arm's responding. So if Brent throws 20 pitches, I throw 20 pitches, and Ryan throws 20 pitches, it's absurd to think we're all going to respond the same. But no matter what pitch count totals we look at, everyone says we're all good to throw tomorrow. So understanding how our body's responding and bouncing back to that, maybe you've lost 1% strength, maybe you've lost 4% strength, maybe I've lost 18% strength on that 20 pitches. So yeah, 2 guys are ready to go. I am not. So understanding how the body's responding is going to help you get, number one, staying recovered. And if you're lacking in recovery, now you're leading into those compensations you're referencing. So we talked earlier, what comes first, that chicken or the egg, the compensation or the fatigue, or the fatigue or the compensation? Well, let's try not to find out. Realistically, when it comes down to it, let's make sure that our arm's recovered, that we're not overdoing it, because the goal is to build volume through understanding how it is our body's going to bounce back and handle that volume and that workload. So now all of a sudden, while I would originally am more fatigable at 20 pitches, we want to build that fatigue point to 40 pitches, 60 pitches, 80 pitches to make us more usable as an athlete.
Yep. Cool. So I tore my rotator cuff at 18 years old, my first college appearance. And so I've spent all this time, I was able to get it back, learn from it, develop programming that helped me get above where I was at the time. I was 18. And I played some indie ball, played European professional baseball, and then I started going down a similar path. I wanted to coach it, study it more, and like Ryan, he has his PhD. I'm finishing my PhD, but constantly looking back to my career, I always wanted to solve my own problems. Is because why it kind of went down this road, and looking at my arm injury, mobility was such a big link to it to me. I had none, like literally hip mobility. And I think when I was young, I just accepted it. My mom couldn't touch her toes, and she used to always say, well, I was just born that way. And so I assumed that maybe that's why I can't touch my toes. Not did I realize that you could actually do something about it till after the injury, right? So super tight hips, which when you have super tight hips, would land in short strides. Hips had to go early. And then what I would try to do is try to overcompensate with my arm to create all my acceleration, or to tap into all the energy that I could to get to the ball. And man, I was like elbow above the shoulder, aggressive laybacks, and just trying to go at max intensity to overcome that. And I believe that was a big thing. So learning how mobility works, and you can actually improve your range of motion, so you can then better apply the mechanics that are going to lengthen the kinetic chain, allow you to get more energy through it, to where you're not just stuck at the end point trying to accelerate the end point as quick as you can.
Yeah.
Other one.
It's pretty amazing how we kind of each have a story, around ourselves, our own journey. One of the things that, we got to look at, and people ask me, like, there are ways to define, great mechanics. And the word efficiency gets thrown around a lot, and you could look at it in different ways. Is it energetic efficiency? Some people use mechanical efficiency. We use pitch efficiency, and we use biomechanical efficiency. But one that I want to talk about is essentially, it's neuromechanical efficiency. It's the blend, and we talk about it in our courses. It's having the ability to not lose strength, okay, after your outings. If you can imagine, a good delivery is one that doesn't tax your nervous system, right? Now, there's also the element of increasing your maximum arm strength. We're not talking about endurance. We're talking about maximum arm strength, making your arm even stronger so that you don't tap in as hard into your neurological resources. That's one. Now, couple that by looking at your ability to locate the baseball, right? And also sustaining velocity. You got kind of the trifecta there to know, like, okay, well, and then the other layer I like is the biomechanical efficiency. So that's the miles per hour to the torque on your elbow, right? On your arm. So you got these factors that you can start to put together and say, is that delivery optimized? I guarantee in kind of your world, being a max effort guy, neurologically, you were probably spent, The other thing is you might have seen velocity decrements that might have, from the first inning going downward. That's kind of an issue. And if you lose command, your injury potential goes up because you're just throwing more. You know, the pitch efficiency ratio that we're talking about when I think of pitching efficiency is how do you get through innings with less pitches? You know, are you getting more chase? Are you getting more miss? Are you getting more weak contact? How are you getting through with less overuse? So like, you know, all of these stories are amazing because we're blending mechanics, but we're also blending the internal world in response to how we throw, which is why I love the dynamometer that we sell in the platform, is that you're really going to know, you know, how your mechanics are. If you got really fatiguing mechanics, you can't hold strength, you can't throw strikes, you know, or you have very low strength, like pounds per miles per hour, or you got really low miles per hour to torque, so you got a lot of load and you're not throwing fast. Ouch, that's a yikes for me.
Want to add one more? Go ahead.
Yeah, so to kind of piggyback on that, another one of my big red flags would be too heavy of an emphasis on pitch development without understanding how to pitch yet. So, you know, we had this question come in when we did the live of what's more important, velocity or movement, and if you were going to kind of invest in one, which one would you do? It says, well, you need to obviously throw hard to start because that's going to be a high predictor of success at the high levels. But you also need to understand how to change speeds off of that higher velocity. So understanding how to pitch before you start emphasizing how much movement can I put on something. Because if you add 8 more inches of movement to a slider, but you still can't throw the one with 8 inches of less movement for a strike, you've done yourself no good. Now you're throwing more pitches per inning.
Yeah.
You've now, you know, given the hitter more opportunity. There may be more foul balls, less chase, less swing and miss. And now you've kind of put yourself, you know, down this rabbit hole of you're chasing an outcome without looking back at the process of how to actually get there. And if the goal is to be a good pitcher, you need to be process oriented, and you need to evaluate that process in terms of, hey, I've added on this sweep to my slider, but I actually get less strikeouts. I'm walking more guys and I'm striking out at the same clip. There's a problem. So you're throwing more pitches, you're working behind in more counts, you're not able to actually perform the way you want to perform. And for me, pitchability is huge. We were talking about efficiency, but pitchability. And that doesn't mean dial back on your fastball to goose him in there at, 46 miles an hour. This mythical Greg Maddux that throws 62 in the big leagues, apparently.
Underhands the ball.
Who's like, well, he relied on movement. He threw in the low 90s. He threw the ball hard when it comes down to it. So let's get rid of that unicorn. We still haven't found one yet. But understanding that developing your ability to pitch off of that good velocity while developing movement outside of that is your secondary, not your primary focus. And I think baseball kind of has that flipped right now, which could be a reason we see a huge emphasis in the uptick of injuries, is we're doing a ton of development of pitch development on weak arms that aren't ready for that. We still need to learn how to pitch.
This is the other thing that kind of like the people who are on the velocity spectrum of, this fear of throwing hard. I want to ask you a few things, but looking at the baseball analytics today, pitchers are throwing less, they have more rest than ever, and they throw way less fastballs. I think it's like 48%. It's not even 50%.
It's circa 50. We'll be generous and say 50.
Throwing 50% of the time at high intensity, okay? So the answer is definitely not, in my opinion, throwing slower, because they're already doing that. They're already throwing like a lot of off speed. Now, the question I have in the game today, because I'm not in the pitch analytics world, are there much more non-competitive pitches because of this? Like if you're pitching off your fastball and your other stuff's doo-doo, I know myself as a hitter, I'd be like, oh my God, you see this breaking ball right out of the guy's hand, or he's got these clean delivery, and his arm's right over the rubber, and I can see it the whole time. And I know that thing ain't dropping in for a strike, and I'm spitting on it. He's throwing 2 or 3 of them in a row.
So get ready for me.
You got,
and maybe I'll piss you off. I don't know. But I'm about to piss off anybody who watches this when it comes down to it. So if you go back and you look at the American League and the National League, look at their averages for strikeout to walk ratio, ERAs, whips, as soon as they started keeping track of FIP, all that stuff. Tell me if the averages have changed. Go back and look. They haven't. They've stayed the same forever. So with this new development model that we have, we've not changed the average. It stayed the exact same. So for instance, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I remember talking with a couple organizations, and I won't use their names because they all think this is super secret proprietary information. Everyone's playing the same deck of cards at the end of the day. But they go, yeah, we've shortened our starters down, we've changed this, we've increased this pitch percentage, we're increasing our swing and miss, but our ERA, our WHIP, our K to walk ratio, we're increasing our strikeouts, but we're also increasing our walks at the same rate. So nothing's changed. We're getting the same result.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it's nothing's really gotten better. If anything, I think we've probably made it a little bit worse.
That is key, because we're talking about process, but now you're adding this whole layer that I think we have to in sports science and coaching to have process-driven results.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you have a process and you're thinking that these are the things that are going to influence the outcomes, you have to look at the outcomes. And when you're saying you're just dialing up these mixers on the sound, you're coming up with the same
result. If I'm going to start telling you have to throw 58% sliders, and it's going to increase your strikeouts, well, better not increase your walks, or we're at a draw. We didn't really make you any better. If the end result is the same on tangible outcome-based metrics, we didn't make that player better. So one of the big problems too, going down this rabbit hole here, is they're not developing pitch plans based on the pitcher. Even though they're saying, well, your fastball plays well in these zones, throw it here. But then you go up against and face a hitter, and they go, well, this guy actually pummels fastballs in that zone. What do we do now? Well, just throw your pitch to that location. Well, this is a really high-end hitter who's hitting above league average, who we need to take some of these things into account here. That if we're going to throw into this guy's red zone, we don't have a second pitch that's going to work fine in those areas. So there's some groups that are doing some really good stuff. And again, I'm not going to say names on things, but players are starting to farm stuff out, going to other organizations. And they started creating different heat maps for a player pitching in the AL East. And all of a sudden, he's having a career year, and he's doing almost the complete opposite of what an org's telling him to do.
I want to jump in and say one thing for a sec, because I know Brent probably wants to say something, but I'm going to communicate about, you guys can't see what's going on behind here, but we're in the actual pitching facility. There's an immaculate training facility across the street with TopVelocity. It's awesome. But when you walk in the door, for me, I get a feel for what kind of development program I'm getting into by looking at the walls and looking at what's around to throw into. Now, every single mound, even the flat ground pieces that Brent has here, there's a target. So behind me, every single one of these bays has a target in which the athlete has to be, conditioned to throw the ball where it's intending to go. And the dichotomy of, we're training for fastball specific pitching, that we're doing a lot more high intensity weighted ball training and all of these things to develop velocity, but then in the game we're not using it. It's telling me that our methods of training and our methods of outcomes are misaligned, and especially if it's happening without any kind of emphasis on accuracy. Like, it's one thing, there are plenty of studies research studies that look at the derivatives of high velocity. There's lots of companies that are out here, and I mean, Brent's company is TopVelocity, but I'm telling you, when you come into programming here and I look at other places, there's some people that really put a premium on putting the ball where it counts. This non-competitive pitches, they kill a player's career. I mean, it's not unusual. You get a guy in minor league baseball, we had them, they throw over 100 miles an hour, but they can't get anyone out because they can't throw strikes. They're not useful enough with the pitch that they're supposed to command to use the secondary pitches, which is a big problem.
All right, back on the tangent of injury. It's funny, I'm dyslexic. I think y'all are dyslexic. But okay, to finish up with injury, number 6 would be, for me, and it kind of goes along the lines, would be learning how to assess your progress or assess your state of health. And I think, ArmCare does that great. Armcare.com has a dynamometer and an app that helps measure daily, ideally, your arm strength and where it needs to be, and tell you if there's any issues of fatigue, or obviously where you're more at high risk of injury. So if you could do more daily, ideally, at least weekly, assessment of your overall health, and arm strength is a great way to do it for a throwing athlete, you're going to not be all of a sudden dealing with an injury or pain leading to an injury and wondering how you got there. You should ultimately be able to catch those things ahead of time. Once again, I'm going back to when I was 18. I wish I would have been doing that, because intuitively I knew a lot was going wrong. And if I would have had a better assessment system or a better way of measuring my progress and my state of health, I would have more than likely known that I was probably going in the wrong direction. So
I want to create some parallels because people, you know, they want to qualify. How do I know if my program is successful on an injury prevention level? Yes, in an ideal world, we want to prevent all injuries. We don't want any of them happening. The reality is, you know, they're going to happen. And I believe there's no luck. You've missed something. You missed an observation. You didn't communicate with somebody. You overworked somebody. The athlete didn't tell you when something was painful for them. They throw through. There are all these things. There are reasons. There is no, you know, bad luck. You know, the key is research is coming out, and the current study has talked about the amateur level, that in every 100 pitchers, I'm going to say it again, every 100 pitchers that you know, the current research here in the United States is that there's 5.4 surgeries for every 100. So 5% of our pitchers in this country, there's 16 million baseball players, there's roughly about 6 or 7 million pitchers, that 5% of them are going under the knife. Now, if you calculated what that costs, you're looking, you know, let's say it's $30,000 for the average surgery, you know, maybe a little bit more when you add the rehabilitation. You're putting an economic burden on the sports world, the medical world, the athlete, the parent of almost $10 billion a year. Okay, there's major money made in ripping and snipping and clipping and attaching and reconstructing. And the part that really bothers me, and I'm quite passionate about it, maybe people think that this guy just, you know, he goes off on this strength matters most, is that we're blaming injuries. We're trying to find everything. We're blaming them on mechanics. And I can tell you, and Jordan, you know, have worked with a lot of guys and know Brent, that some of them have really funky deliveries and they don't get hurt. And then you get a lot of guys that have really nice, clean deliveries. The ball's beautiful. The arm lays back easy, you know, and they can't keep healthy. But we're not doing a good enough job. We need to, before we look at the mechanics, before we start worrying about a radar gun, is to really understand the functioning of the arm. So if you got a company right now and you have over 100 players, okay, and you got more than 5 injuries that require surgery, you're not doing a good job. You should be down to 0.05. That's what we're at right now. We've had 2 reported surgeries so far, and I think 8 conservative injuries, okay? You need to get that as close to 0 as possible. Is it humanly possible? No, that's not real. But the ideal thing is that you're going to try to not miss observations. And what Brent's saying as a player is that every day, part of his development, part of his routine, his regimen, okay, the preparation process is to understand where his arm is that day, and in terms of making a decision on how he's going to adjust his training to facilitate a healthier arm. If he's going into a training session and his arm is as strong as like can be as an ox, and he's giving himself like, you know, a really light day when he should be having a heavy day, he's under training himself. He's lessening the capacity. So there's just no sense anymore guessing, okay, when you can assess, and every player can do this for themselves.
all right, well, check us out, TopVelocity.net, armcare.com. Get more information on it. Follow us here. Share it with your buddies if they have issues too. Appreciate you following us. See you next time.